Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so I was told that we have to kill a little tiny bit of time in the very beginning here before, which I probably wasn't supposed to admit, before we actually get started. So I have an interesting question for you. So while we're killing time, Entry Point is doing this like Midwest shop local gift guide thing, where we have had a bunch of small businesses across the Midwest submit, like if they've got like a gift that they're selling for the holidays or a bunch of different things that people could buy. And so the one thing I'm finding though is, so we're featuring 20 of them on the Cackle, like the week after Thanksgiving. I'm like, so Tim is an investor. I'll introduce him in a second when we're done killing time. And the one thing I'm realizing is I'm going through, like, we've got like, a couple, like we've got like 100 different companies and I have to select 20 of them. What is your advice for who to pick? I'm like going through being like, oh, this grandpa is like selling this thing at farmers markets. And then I'm like, oh, this young person is like doing this. And like everyone seems so good. I'm like,
well, it may be, maybe you have to do a split, like 70-30, 70% of the ones that are actually popular, that are doing really well. Because people were more likely to like them, obviously, if they're doing well.
Okay.
And maybe a third or three of them that that you think need special attention, that aren't getting the attention they really deserve. Like,
that's good advice.
Potential sleepers.
Yeah, that is a good advice.
The way those things work, usually you pick the top 10, it's like a snowball effect, right? They're the 10 that already are popular, so they get even more popular. And the ones that don't make it on that list just get forgotten about. So mix it up.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, that is good, because I've been like, want to pick like all the grandpas and like all the people that I'm like, oh yeah, like do it. And then there's like some of them though that you're like, well, everybody knows this name, but like, and would be really interested in buying this. So okay, that's good advice.
That's what makes it fun about changing it up.
Yeah. Okay, now we can get started. So hello everybody. Welcome to the Cackle. Today we have on Tim Schigel. It's Schigel, right?
You got it.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. From Refinery Ventures. Tim is super interesting. There's actually like 5 things I wanted to catch up with you on about your past before I ask you any questions. So Tim has been sort of like in all aspects of the tech community. You've been in the operator role. You've been at a fund of funds at Centrifuge, and then you have your own venture fund, Refinery Ventures. And so I was like super excited, because I never really knew this the whole time I knew you, that you started that like this company, the ShareThis, and I was like, that's so famous.
Yeah.
How did that even get started? And it's like literally on every website that like, so for people that don't know,
it reaches like 1 billion people a month, something like that.
It's crazy. Like I was like, somebody invented that and it was you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wait, so like how did that get started? And like,
well, there's a long story, but it actually, the seed of the idea went back quite a long way. 2 components, 2 streams came together. One, I'm a big fan of like complexity and chaos theory and stuff like that, machine learning. And if anybody's heard of something called genetic algorithms, which is a form of machine learning, actually came out of the University of Michigan, Professor John Holland and David Goldberg.
Oh, cool.
And David Goldberg's the guy that wrote the books on it and stuff like that. And I had often use that as a metaphor, a model to say, how can we create information to personalize information, et cetera, based on things you clicked on over time. So what if we created what I call the consumer chromosome, right? So imagine your cookie trail, like everything you've done on the web, becomes your DNA, right?
Oh, okay. This sounds like something my brother would really dislike. He's very afraid of everything on the internet tracking.
No, yeah, the point is, wouldn't have to have it, that was it. It's inherently secure. It doesn't have to have any of your personal data at all.
Oh, interesting.
So then I was an investor in a company called advertising.com, which we sold in 2004 to AOL. It was a big success. And after that, I was getting a lot of, marketing, media, tech, internet deals. That was a famous deal and a great company. And I revisited this consumer chromosome idea, and I thought, the internet's going to become more people-oriented. Not site-oriented, but people-oriented. The term social network didn't exist.
Yeah. What year was this?
2004.
Oh, man.
So it kind of stewed on and incubated the idea. We actually started it in 2007, and we discovered that the behavior that was people-oriented was sharing, and that everybody was focused on search. But the truth was, what we found out from doing some focus groups and some analysis was, one, nobody knew how many people shared content or what content was shared on the web, period. Nobody. The browsers, Netscape didn't know it. Google didn't know it. Nobody knew it.
Yeah, that's
and then we knew, and I knew personal, that I shared links every day and I received shared links.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Through the research, we found that most of users' new information they find is from a shared link, not from a search.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true. I know nowadays all I see is like things shared on social media, and that's like how I absorb all my information.
Yeah. So we're like, all right, we got to capture that. Right. We're going to figure that out. And so we launched the ShareThis tools for publishers. That was how we were going to do distribution. We actually started with a toolbar, a Chrome extension first.
Oh, okay.
But then we said, hey, because publishers were, they had the old email to a friend on their website.
Yeah.
Big button and all these little icons, but those were all dumb image links. Dumb meaning they were passive.
Yeah.
This was like the first JavaScript smart button.
That's because I do remember, like, when I first started seeing that come out, I was like, oh, this is so handy, because it was like so much easier to just share things to social media, because you can be like type it in and just like actually not have to copy and paste anything or.
Right. So
nice.
Yeah, so that was it. So it's on millions of websites. When I launched it, it just took off. Like, we were hoping, it's kind of interesting. This is a good lesson for startups. The business plan was we were launching in November, like first week in November, and it's first started primarily as a WordPress plugin. We were hoping to get it onto 200 websites by the end of the year. So we had 2 months to get 200 websites, right?
Yeah.
And we had no press releases, nothing. We just did a blog post, a WordPress update. We had 1,000 websites installed it in the first week.
Jeez.
And that's what you want, right? You want to see that, wow, there's strong signal, right? There's strong signal.
Exactly.
So it never slowed down. We never had to advertise for it. It just, the bigger it got, the bigger it got. It had the network effect and the
Where were you guys located?
Well, started here in Cincinnati.
Okay. And then did you
headquarters in Palo Alto.
Okay. And then how did you make money off of that?
So, using the data for advertising. So we would do,
okay.
The company's now more data oriented. And again, we were one of the first ones. We do not use personal data at all.
Yeah.
We know sharing across all forms of social media and email. So the ShareThis data about user profiles is actually way better in many ways than Facebook or Twitter, because those are walled gardens. Okay. Turns out people's behavior is different depending on which channel you're talking about.
Yeah.
And one of the still most influential channels is still email. Right? Like if I really want you to know something, I'm going to send it to you in email or text. Right? I'm not going to just post on Facebook and hope you find it.
Yeah.
Now, to the extent that Facebook Messenger or something sort of takes over your email instead of email, maybe that won't be true. But for most people, email is still a pretty big deal.
I feel like Anita, our social media person, is probably watching this right now, and she's like, see, Ellie, that's why I tell you to send out more newsletters. And I'm always like, nah, I don't like newsletters. And she's probably watching this being like, don't email me right now, Anita.
You talk to any author, anybody else who has a platform, the most valuable thing they have is their email list, right? Because the other problem is if you build an audience on Facebook, one of these closed platforms, they can change the rules, and they have.
Yeah.
At any point, and all of a sudden, you realize later that they own your audience, you don't.
Yeah,
so
that's
email is a way for you to still own your audience. So
what happened to the Cackle?
what?
What would happen to the Cackle? They would have all my, well, I guess all my videos. Bless you.
Yeah, so you need an email list. So it was advertising related, and we grew revenue. It became one of the fastest growing companies in the country. So the first year of revenue was really only half a year of revenue, and this is when we were experimenting. I think of startup revenue in two phases. There's test revenue and then scale revenue. And up to the first $1 million of revenue, it's test revenue. Like, you're not optimizing for revenue or revenue growth. Matter of fact, I used to tell the board, forget about the revenue. Like, don't focus on it. Don't ask me what it's going to be next month, because that's not what I'm trying to do. We're trying to learn. We're trying to learn pricing. We're trying to learn packaging, positioning, efficiency or efficacy, like ROI. So that first half a year was 700 grand in revenue, and that gave us enough data points to project the next year. And we did something kind of silly, and we projected that we were going to do 10 million the next year.
That's like every startup, though, isn't that? Like, as like an investor, don't you see people be like,
I'd like it to be. It's not,
but next year it's going to be $10 billion.
I would say the vast majority do not do. I'd say the vast majority of plans are actually less aggressive.
Oh, really? Okay.
And very sort of incremental. So somebody would say, hey, we're going to do 700,000. Let's plan to do 2 or 3 million next year, which is still great.
Yeah.
We had enough reach and enough data that we felt confident. You know, our salespeople wanted to do 4 or 5 million. Our developers wanted to do 20, and our head of operations said we could deliver 10. We've got that. And so the actual ended up being 12.
Man.
And the next year was 32, and the next year was 50. So it went pretty fast. And
then did it get acquired, or what happened?
It's still private.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The main competitor, ShareThis, was bought by Oracle.
Okay. Never heard of them.
Yeah, no, that's the other big one. I had an opportunity for us to combine early on, and the investors did. Yeah, that's another whole story. But our data was always way better, and our relative reach was kind of the same. So our network, both networks, just kept growing at basically the same rate, which is another interesting thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, talk a little bit about, since I didn't give very much of your actual background or anything, so talk a little bit about your background, and then like Refinery Ventures and what your investment focus is and all of that.
Okay. So I grew up in Cleveland, fairly blue collar family. My dad worked in a steel mill, but he was an electrician. So I was around technology and gadgets and vacuum tubes and stuff. I studied electrical engineering at Case Western Reserve.
Yeah.
And actually helped start a program between Case Western and the Cleveland Institute of Music. I play guitar, combining in the 80s, computers and music were coming together, right? With all the sampling and digital and synthesizers and all that stuff. So we started a curriculum there, and I built my senior project. I built this piece of hardware that was like an intelligent harmonizer, and I wrote the software on a Macintosh, and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm applying for jobs, and it's all the big names, the IBMs and the GMs and the whatevers. And I get this email from a small company in Cincinnati. And they really liked the music side. They liked the Macintosh side and the music side of what I was doing. And so, my family was kind of, like I said, blue collar and entrepreneurial. So I kind of tended towards the entrepreneurial side of things versus big company. So I went down and met him, and Mark, the guy who interviewed me, one of the founders, I remember he was like in shorts and flip flops. I was like, what? And, so I became the 10th employee, and he really dug the fact that I knew Apple and was into music. And Mark and Rick both were there at this company. I find out like 4 months later, those were Neil Armstrong's sons, which is kind of cool. And so that's great to have known and Neil and brought him on to boards and stuff like that. But the really interesting piece was Mark went to Stanford, and a lot of his friends ended up being early Apple employees, and that we were tied pretty closely to Apple. And at the time, P&G was our biggest customer. P&G was doing a lot of advanced work with that. And so that started my West Coast Silicon Valley connection. And in that company, I ended up setting up our West Coast office. And so ever since then, so for the past 30 years, I've had an office off and on out in Silicon Valley continuously, and a place to live when I was doing ShareThis. So I've worked there. I get around there as if I live there, but I don't live there, right? I'd rather visit.
Yeah.
And, so I got into, from that company, a couple different things, did some stuff globally, ended up wanting to get into venture capital, got asked to join Blue Chip Venture Company, which was the first venture firm in Cincinnati. I didn't even know venture existed in Cincinnati. I thought I'd have to move to the West Coast. Blue Chip, I joined during Fund 2. We had, while I was there 9 years, we had 6 funds, $600 million under management. So it was one of the biggest in the Midwest, with today's standards, and this was late 90s.
Yeah.
I got in just in time to have some fun during the bubble, and then a lot of learning lessons after the bubble. So the very first company I worked on, we founded a company, a big seed, literally a $30 million seed round with Venrock and Growtech, and then a Series B months later for 62 million, I think, and then within about 18 months went public.
Jesus.
1999, and it was worth $3 billion. So our $10 million turned, we sold just a fraction of it and got like $100 million back.
What did your parents think of this? All of this? Because I feel like, was your dad kind of like, you're going into electrical engineering and now you're going to work at a tech company and in finance?
The tech has been a thread through the whole thing, right? So I kind of think of myself more as a tech entrepreneur than anything else. Less of an investor, is more. Yeah. So I studied, and this is kind of a lesson we taught to our kids. My son has an aerospace engineering degree, a daughter in industrial design, another daughter in nursing. I think there's too much pressure on kids to figure out what they're going to do in life when they're in college. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that the future was going to be heavy tech, and that if I had a good engineering degree, I could do anything. I could be a lawyer, I could be an engineer, I could be whatever.
Yeah.
So, just like a lot of people, my career evolved over time, and what I'm doing is very consistent with, I think, who I am, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you that back then. Right?
Yeah, going more technical to then you can always choose to be slightly less technical.
Well, I went from being technical to going into more sales because somebody told me early on in my first few years of working that I was able to translate technical concepts into things other people, laymen, could understand. And that was super valuable. And it turns out that's true, right? And so I would go in to kind of do a project and I'd come back with more business.
Yeah.
I just naturally was able to sell more stuff because people trusted that I could help them, right?
Yeah.
And I made a whole lot more money on the sales side than I did as a technical person.
Yeah, so, that is true how that works out. And you're kind of creative too. I mean, you're in guitar. We have one question, Yulia Messiah. Sorry if I just said your last name wrong. How did you get into guitar? And she thinks that music and arts is an important component of success.
I agree 100%. I think it's music and math and science, engineering, all similar sort of parts of the brain. My family's all very musical. My brother toured the world. My brother's he has a recording studio in Cleveland. I have a cousin in Nashville who's toured the world with some famous country artists. I do a concert once a year for a big charity that we do, but that's all I have time for. But
you practice a lot though still, or do you play a lot still, just on your own?
Well, we're not in my home studio right now. I do my podcast from my home studio, which is
really
kind of killer. My background at home is all guitars.
That's cool. Astronauts at work, guitars at home. I like that.
Yeah. So I have guitars here. I got guitars over there that I pick up, during the day. But I don't have time to have a band, and I don't think I would
Yeah.
With being in a working band and getting home at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
The concert we do is called Suits That Rock. And this would have been the 13th year. It's usually in June. It got canceled this year.
It's probably better for the better 13th year, you know.
I know. It's kind of weird, right? 40 different.
Yeah, right to the 14th year, you're all set.
Hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have like 40 different people that are like in business and also musicians, and it's 2 weekends in June. It's going to be in October next year, and we do it at the Carnegie Theater in Covington, Kentucky. Like seats, let's say 500 people, and full light show, 3-hour show. It's so when I don't play often, but when I do play, we do it the right way. It's
yeah,
cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so then you were an operator for a long time, and then eventually started. You were at a fund of funds for almost 8 years. At
Well, 4 years. So I went from CEO to chairman at ShareThis because we wanted to have a CEO that was on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Shortly after I did that, the CEO of Procter & Gamble was leading an effort to start Centrifuge in Cincinnati.
Okay.
The idea for Centrifuge was to create more venture-backed startups in the ecosystem, and one component of that was to create a fund of funds, and it was inspired by Chris Ryzik and Renaissance Fund in Michigan.
Yeah, yay, Chris.
And I knew Chris when he was with Rick Snyder at Ardesta, so they started asking me if I would run it, and I first was like, no, like fund of funds was too far removed. So fund of funds invest in other venture funds, which invest in startups, right? Yeah. So that's just too much overhead. But I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do next, if I was going to do a startup or get back in venture. It was a great way to help out, the ecosystem and leverage things that I've learned. And it's there aren't many people who've built a successful startup and done venture. And I'd get to do due diligence, basically dig in and meet, right, what was in 4 years over 200 other venture firms.
Yeah, yeah, that is cool.
The fact that I had been in a venture fund first, where I got to learn a lot, both good and bad, I got to kind of validate against the ones that, see what separates the best from the rest. Like, what's the difference between coastal firms and Midwest firms, or, or different stages or what have you. And we invested in about 20 funds, including Techstars and Upfront and Bullpen and Lear Hippo Ventures and Pelion Ventures and Atlas Healthcare. Mercury Ventures, I'm probably missing some. Alos was here locally. So it was a great experience. It's I was able to help startups raise about 150 million in that 3 to 4 year period of time. And that is where the insight, the next aha, like ShareThis was an aha moment, for me, that sharing was a big deal. Refinery was the next aha. And the aha was, I met with probably 300 entrepreneurs. I was trying to help them raise money, basically, right? And match them up with VCs. And some would have, let's say, $500,000 or $1 million in revenue. And they would show me their projections, and they were okay. I'd start asking this question. I said, well, what would have to be true for you to have 10 million in revenue next year? And I would just get this blank stare. Now, it was interesting because I wasn't running a fund that could invest in them at the time. If I was, their answer to a VC is usually, well, give me $5 million and I'll do it, right?
Yeah.
So because I wasn't going to invest directly, I got a more honest answer, I think. And the truth was, they really didn't know. And they weren't even thinking about it that way or asking that question. And their investors and advisors weren't asking that question. And when I thought about my own experience with ShareThis, we did that. But one of the reasons we did that was because I was an investor in advertising.com, and I saw them go from 0 to 135 million in revenue in about 5 years.
Yeah.
And I literally took those board meeting decks and used them as a benchmark quarter to month and quarter to quarter when I was doing ShareThis, saying, well, if they could do this, why can't I do that?
Yeah.
So it gave me a lot of perspective and confidence. And what I realized is, in Silicon Valley, and I found data on this, in Silicon Valley, 35% of venture-backed founders have prior hypergrowth experience. Okay, And in somewhere like Ohio, it's like 5%.
Yeah.
So for people listening, like how many people do you know have not founded a company, just worked at a company that went from 0 to 10 million and beyond, or 10 to 100? Growth is growth.
Yeah.
And high growth is unique. So I realized, wait a minute, I've been for decades talking about the strengths of the Midwest and the Great Lakes. We have all these great schools, Case Western, University of Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, Ohio State, UC, et cetera, et cetera. But we only get 3% of the venture capital dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody assumes it's because we don't have capital. And that's a myth. And I'll refer people back to what I call the first law, which is capital follows growth. If we had startups that were growing fast, there'd be money from the coast flooding in here, and there'd be more venture funds in the Midwest.
Yeah.
But there haven't been, and it hasn't changed much for decades. And I think this leadership piece is the missing link, if you will. So I built Refinery around that notion. So the idea of Refinery is that, leaders are made by overcoming adversity, and exceptional leaders thrive in it, right? The exceptional leader, LeBron says, give me the ball with the last 3 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And that's how leaders are evolve or made, is by, gaining confidence by overcoming bigger and bigger obstacles. And there are a ton of people that, I refer to as boomerangs, that grow up in the Midwest, that go to the East Coast or West Coast, learn some of those lessons. They're in some of those high growth situations, but usually 8 or 10 years into it, there's a significant part of that population that wants to come back, right? They start having kids, whatever. Those people they have a wealth of knowledge, and nobody recruits them. Right?
Why do you think?
It astounds me that nobody does. I don't know why they don't. It seems totally obvious to me. Every single person I've hired that fits that kind of description, the boomerang description, has been an all-star.
Yeah.
Because they had an experience that's very different than the local experience. And I've done work all over the world, so I appreciate and I love different cultures and doing that. So that helped me gain a different perspective too than one that's a person maybe that's only been in one location. But the other thing is, I think there's the fascination and the fascination with entrepreneurs and the Mark Zuckerberg model, which has also been a myth, right? There's been plenty of research reports that show the fastest growing companies in the country, the average age of the CEO is 40, plus or minus 1 year. It's not even a big range, but the myth is the Zuckerberg, the 19-year-old dropout. And that's very rare. Yeah. So people are focused on, that's like a red herring. People are focused on like repeat founders. Again, the data is pretty mixed and even negative that, a lot of times if a founder is successful the first time, they don't recognize how much of that was luck. So they think anything they touches turns to gold, and that's not true.
That's not exactly. I've had a lot of conversations with founders where they are like, I'll be like, yeah, like, what do you think set you apart from other? We got lucky so many times. Oh man, like it was like the things were in stance to like stumble into like, oh, this isn't working, and they change like one little thing and then run into the right person that then is like carves a path forward. And
yeah, so that takes humility, and the good entrepreneurs understand their role that luck plays, luck and timing. Same as artists, same as musicians, by the way. Like, my brother and cousin in Nashville, you have to be good. They're all really good in Nashville. That's not why they become famous, right? Luck and timing play a huge part of that. Luck, timing, networking, which all come together. And so anyway, why do people not? So people tend to focus on the wrong thing. They focus on people who've been founders before instead of focusing on like the VP of product who was at, Box or was at Pinterest, or that person's learning is going to translate, and maybe that person will become a founder of the next company. Kind of like the PayPal mafia, right? Many of those folks went on to, do great things, including Elon Musk. So I think we need to tap into it. And So I designed Refinery around trying to fill that gap and recognizing that gap, and focusing on a specific stage, which is post-seed round. Bullpen Ventures calls it. They claim to have defined post-seed as successful Series A funds raise bigger funds, and they kind of move to later and later. So this gap exists between seed and Series A sometimes that they call post-seed plus. We call it early scale. It has less to do with the name of the preferred stock, more to do with the stage of the company.
Okay.
That's where the gap exists. We have a lot of great seed investors and programs and funds throughout, not just the Midwest, but other overlooked markets, right?
Yeah.
Non-Silicon Valley, non-New England. But I found some fascinating data back to the first law, which is capital follows growth. So if you look at the Great Lakes region versus New England, and you look at PitchBook venture investing data, they're about equivalent on a deal basis. So we have 9% of all venture deals last year, and New England has about 9% of all venture deals. Awesome. New England has 10% of all venture dollars. We have 3%. So there's like a 2-3x gap, a big gap. This isn't an incremental 10%, 20% gap. It's multiple gap. And people say, well, that's because there's no capital. Like, no, the gap doesn't get closed by having more seed rounds or bigger seed rounds. It gets closed by having bigger A's and B's, right? Which requires companies to progress. And as one of my friends, as I learned from, I think, Tim Draper, you invest in the seed. Huh?
Is Tim Draper a hockey player? That's probably some like Red Wings stuff. I'm like, wait, what?
Maybe.
Tim Draper, one of the hockey players? But yeah.
I don't think he plays hockey. He might play hockey.
He was I want to say he was like a famous hockey player around like Detroit. So of course I'm like, Tim Draper, the hockey player? And you're like, I don't know who you're talking about.
Well, what he said about like seed, Series A, Series B is in seed stage you're investing in the idea. In A, you're investing in the rumor, and in B, you're investing in the data, right? So that's pretty much true, right? So to progress to the Series A, you need more data. You need more early signs that this is going to scale, and people will happily invest if you have the metrics. And I also learned this with Centrifuge and trying to help some of the startups. I could get a VC from the coast hooked on the phone and on a plane the next day to visit a company by just sharing the metrics, and they'll show up and they still don't even know what the company does. Like, they don't care because it's just pattern recognition. They see the numbers and they'll figure out what they do later. And that's a little hyperbole, but not much. So another PitchBook piece of data that I think verified this for me is I looked at percentage of companies that progress from seed to Series A by region. And actually, to my surprise, the Great Lakes region is the lowest. So we got plenty of startups that are getting funded, not enough getting to the next round. And they're not getting to the next round, not because the money doesn't exist. It's because they're not posting the right metrics. They need to understand that investors, whether they're coastal investors or local investors, are looking for breakout growth. Like if I'm a Silicon Valley investor and I find somebody who's seems to be a brilliant entrepreneur and they have a great idea, that's great. But I'm surrounded by a million of them. I don't need to get on an airplane for that, right? Yeah. The reason I'll get on the airplane or I'll spend time with you is if you actually have growth metrics. And like I said, I haven't had difficulty raising money for a company ever when I had the metrics. Period.
So what metrics do you think, I guess, like when you're seeing startups in the Midwest that are kind of like putting these pitch decks together and are not showing the right things, what would you say are the right things that they should be showing?
Well, it's about growth, and the growth is usually revenue, but doesn't have to be revenue. Share this as an example. We had distribution growth that we knew we could monetize later, but we were getting real estate, right? We weren't monetizing it yet, but we knew how to monetize it. So there could be a proxy for growth, distribution being one of them. You know, when we look at companies, I look at two things. I look for proprietary data or distribution advantage. Like, what's unique about your data, and do you have some kind of distribution advantage? But it's growth at the end of the day, and growth needs to be, you know, may have heard Bessemer may have made this famous, but it's kind of the baseball analogy in terms of year-over-year growth. You need 2 triples and 3 doubles. So 1 million going to 3, 3 going to 9, 9 to 18, 18 to 36, 36 72. If you have that path, you can go public, right? So why not build your business plan around that and do what's called backcasting? So the backcasting is, say, that's where I want to be. I want to be at 10 million next year. What are the things I have to do to get there? Okay. Too many times, people who haven't had that hypergrowth experience think about it in the incremental bottoms-up way. They say, well, I have 1 million. Can I grow 100%? That sounds big. That sounds impressive. And it is, but it's not impressive enough to get somebody on an airplane from the West Coast to invest. But if you can go from 1 to 3, that's interesting. So it gets back to like the test revenue. The test revenue is really, you know, that 0 to 1 million. Then you need to learn how you scale it. And you need to do it in a capital efficient way. So like when we look at companies, if more than 3 million has gone into them before they get to 1 million in revenue, it's probably not going to be a fit. And that's not true just for us. It's true for a lot of early stage investors.
Okay.
So if you don't get that, like if I see a company and 5 million or 10 million's gone in and they finally have something, right? How many times have you heard that story? It's not going to pass the first filter for most investors. Most investors are not going to care because they have other companies that got to that same milestone with a lot less capital. And if you raise that much capital, that means you're going to have a lot of probably upset investors because the company's not worth as much as they probably thought it was, right? And good for you that you finally figured it out. But the challenge you have is you got this like boat anchor, right, in terms of money. So you really have to think about capital efficiency. And so by the time we invest, we're still thinking of capital efficiency, which is all about customer acquisition, right? And if you have $1 million in revenue, that first million, first of all, half of it's probably false positives, meaning they're customers you can't replicate. It's like your brother-in-law or your friend, or, you know, and you shouldn't try to. Again, you're supposed to be learning in that first test revenue. So first you got to recognize what your market segment really is, which requires not just saying, oh, it's enterprise. No, getting very, very, very specific about your market segment. That's the first step. Second step is experimenting quickly on customer acquisition so that you can start to see build an economic model that's going to scale. So you can't scale yet, right? And matter of fact, your company has very limited operating history, so you can't forecast well yet either. So like if you tell me you're going to do 3 million next year, it's going to be really hard to make me believe you unless you have pretty stable numbers. So what you need to do is show those stable unit economic numbers and get good at forecasting first. Just like a runner or any other kind of sport, you do it slow initially.
Yeah.
You can do it well with the right form, because if you don't get the right form, you're not going to be able to go fast. It's the same with a company, right? So show me that you can predict for me what's going to happen in sales every month. Then I'll start believing you're going to be able to scale it. So I'm not as interested in, if you're going from 1 to 3 million, I'm interested in the 3, but I'm really wanting to know, when you're done with the 3, are you going to 9 or 10? Like, are the things getting put in place that are going to scale? If you have to fight by hook or by crook to get to the 3, it's going to be impossible to get to the 9, right?
Yeah.
If it takes that much effort.
Yeah.
So you're really looking for 2 years out, 3 years out, not just this year.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like that is, I feel like it's like makes a lot of sense though. You know, you're looking for capital efficient companies that are going to be able to scale and have a structure put in place that is going to enable them to be able to be successful in scaling. Like, I feel like that's totally like the name of the game in venture capital. Like, it's like, do this. And then
it's common sense. It should be, but then you have to ask yourself, how many people am I talking to? How many people are on my team? How many of my mentors or advisors have actually done it?
Yeah. And I think, do you think that in the Midwest, there's kind of like we're reaching an inflection point where you're saying when you started in venture 20 years ago, there was like not really that many venture firms, not really that many people going and starting at tech companies and things like that. And like now I do find that it's more common to have investors that were on the operating side and had scaled a company, made some money, and then now are investing in companies that are along the same lines of the company that they had experience in. Do you feel like that seems true more broadly, or is still just instances of that in the Midwest?
I think I think it's true, but it is the successes are still a bit isolated. I think the density of that growth experience is still low. Um, so there's still a ways to go. So back to the capital difference between us and New England is 3x.
Mm-hmm.
Like we might have been growing at 10%. We're not
Yeah.
growing at 100 or 2 or 300% right now.
And you think the sort of bridging that gap is in attracting the boomerang talent back from the coast that have kind of gone there, gotten some experience, and bring them back?
Yeah.
And do you feel like there's any good efforts across the Midwest that are doing that at all?
Nope. I've talked to 25 universities. Yeah, I talk to universities because I think they're a great source of IP, just like Stanford and MIT are on the coast. That's untapped. And
Yeah.
universities have more pressure than ever to commercialize technology, right? But they haven't really gone about it the right way. They're missing a valuable component. What they don't understand is like take Stanford, for example. Stanford doesn't do anything. The benefit Stanford has is just where it's located. They're surrounded by window shoppers. And the window shoppers are the entrepreneurs who know how to raise money, who pull stuff out. Right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of examples of Stanford not even knowing what they had, but some entrepreneur knew that those grad students or somebody else was working on something cool.
Yeah.
And tech transfer is just trying to keep up. So if you look at it as a marketplace, supply and demand, they've got the entrepreneur represents the demand side. The entrepreneur is translating tech into a market application, right? The university is just the supply side, and they're not usually that good at projecting the demand for their tech. A lot of times they think their tech is good for this, but it's actually better for that.
Yeah.
And the entrepreneur is the one that figures that out.
Yeah.
So we don't have enough window shoppers. So what I've talked to a lot of these universities about is working with us as we recruit these boomerangs and making them window shoppers, basically putting them on a shopping spree and saying, okay, you got this great idea. Let's go to the best universities in the Midwest and find the best tech to help you get there. So I think the model has to flip. And
you think that's the role of universities, or do you think there's like somewhere else in like economic developers? I could see I feel like people
economic development. So
like kind of kick around like how can we attract talent back to the Midwest and things like. Are they just not doing it in the right way?
We're talking to different folks. I think economic development has a huge role there. Refinery. We're looking for economic development groups who would want to partner with us on this, because I think we need to give people a platform. Let's say you're looking to move. You're going to move from Silicon Valley to Michigan, right? But you don't know what you're going to do yet. And you call Emily, you call Chris Ryzik, you say, hey, what are the startups that are hot? And there's like 3, that meet their criteria. And those 3 don't really have a role for them. So they're like, what do we do? The vision I have is let's give them a platform for 12 months and help them figure out whether they're going to join a company or start a company, right? And get them on that journey, set it up as a platform to launch them, right? And part of the important point of having a fund involved is that the smart entrepreneurs go where the money is.
Yeah.
They're not going to a university. So it's hard for a university to recruit the right person, because the right person is not going to a university, right? But if you have the source of capital involved that says, hey, Emily, if you move back to Michigan, we're going to put you in this program for 12 months to have something. And basically when you find what you're going to do, we're investing in it. Full stop. Right? Like your capital is guaranteed. that's the potential I think is there that I've been talking to folks about, and would love to find the right folks in Michigan or Ohio or Indiana, any of the states that see that. It's not a traditional approach. I think it's a very capital efficient approach. However, I mean, economic development loves building buildings and loves talking about jobs, right? This requires much less capital, and whether a successful startup gets created or not, you're bringing a successful leader into the region.
Yeah.
You have positive multiplier effects no matter what happens, right? So it's really, in my view, a no-lose proposition.
Do you think that people that are kind of at the stage where they've been, let's say in San Francisco for 7 to 10 years, have had some good experience at a scale-up company, are now, how old did that make them? About 30? That them coming back to like start a family, that they would feel like if they had a year of runway to kind of be like an entrepreneur in residence, I guess is what maybe they to like find a company to be with or start a company utilizing university technology somewhere in the Midwest, that they would feel that was a secure enough runway for them to do that while starting a family?
Yeah, matter of fact, we did some data mining and found 1,200 candidates that fit this description that are between 30 and 40 years old. The key is that criteria, which is the hypergrowth background. Not everybody who's been in a hypergrowth background wants to be a CEO or a founder, right? Mm-hmm. And that's okay too, by the way. You might be able to find somebody who's a great CTO and they'd be great for an existing team or as a founding technical person, right? Yeah. But we've had conversations with specific people, and it's interesting because when I talk to investors or economic development people, they think these people are going to come back and don't need income.
Yeah.
Like, no. If you're in your 30s and 40s and you've had some level of success, first of all, you may have had success, but you weren't the majority equity holder in that company, in Pinterest, let's say. So you're not exactly retired. And there aren't many 30 years, there aren't many people in their 30s I know that are raising family that are good with going without income for a year. So
yeah, I feel like people who just don't need any money, that are like already like, don't bring them back here. They can just stay out there.
It's funny. That's what some people think that. But they're okay with getting a modest salary, right? Perfectly okay with that, knowing that that's not the be all end all. We don't want them getting, fat and happy on that income from that first, 12 months. We want them motivated to launch a company, but they need to be able to tell their spouse or their kids, whatever, hey, I got some money coming in, I'm covering the rent, whatever it is. And they're worth it, by the way, right? And the numbers we're talking about are usually half or a third of what they are making today.
Yeah.
So it's clearly not, it doesn't require a market rate. And if it does, then you get the wrong person, right? You need somebody who's willing to bet on themselves too.
I'm definitely going to be asking other people about what they think of this, because I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, is that?
So I
makes sense what you're saying, but then I'm like, I wonder what people's perspective is of like why they think it wouldn't work or what has been tried that's similar. That like, I don't know why people wouldn't be like kind of moving forward with that. Like there's been a couple of initiatives in trying to like attract back some people, but maybe they just weren't the right people, and setting them up with kind of the right environment here to be successful.
Those are some of the mistakes. I remember some of this idea I tested out with Dave Washburn at Michigan State, actually, who I knew back from when he was at University of Illinois. And the typical like entrepreneur residence that a university hires is getting paid too much money for a part-time job, and they have no incentive to start something. So they hang out for 3 or 4 years and they finally go, okay, you got to move on. So the profile isn't right. The incentives aren't right. And that's some of the mistake. The other mistake I've seen people make is they focus on quantity instead of quality.
Okay.
This is special forces, right? You want the elite.
Yeah.
There aren't going to be 100 of these, right? If you can find 3 to 5 of them a year, that would be awesome. So you got to reset the thinking there too. I've seen some universities where they're like, oh, we want 30 entrepreneurs in residence. And my thought was, well, good luck with that. Like you're going to, I have no doubt you'll get 30, but the quality of those 30, whether they're going to really produce something is, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point. Okay, I know we're running super over. So I wanted to ask you one last question. So just in the realm of like kind of bringing people in the Midwest together a little bit more, what is like one must attend event in Ohio that you feel like if people in like the tech community want to get more familiar and connect more with people in Ohio, like what, let's say beyond the pandemic, we're just ignoring the pandemic. Don't get into the pandemic.
We'll be in denial. We'll be in denial for this talk. Well, the event, I'll share the event, but I first want to say, Chris Ryzik from Renaissance helped me and us a lot with Centrifuge, and he was served on the investment committee, and we shared notes all the time. We would say, hey, this worked. He would replicate it in Michigan. He would say, this works in Michigan. We'd replicate it here. It was a great opportunity for us to learn, and that's what happens. Like in Silicon Valley, there's I call faster learning loops, right? Word gets around a lot faster than it does in the Great Lakes because we're separated by so much distance. And so we need to actively overcome that. And as one of my friends, Don Wright from AssureX says, it's not states collaborating with states, it's people collaborating with people, right? So the amount of engagement and interaction we've had between Cincinnati and folks in Michigan, like you and Chris and others, was tighter than I think you've had with Columbus or Cleveland, and they're closer. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was you or somebody else that said that once a couple of years ago. So first off, reach out and establish collaborative relationships with people. And that's where it starts. The event down here that's always been, there's a lot going on, a lot of great folks, a lot of VCs come, is Startup Cincy Week, which probably be different this year. It starts Tuesday, October 27th. It's been done very well the last 5 years, 6 years. It's a great chance to catch up with a lot of people that they haven't seen. If you go to the Centrifuge website, CINTRIFUSE, I think it's somewhere on the site there. Like I said, this year is going to be different, I'm sure, but
what day is it starting in? October 27th, you said?
27th, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm like gonna write that so everybody knows. Yeah, I think that is like, because I do find like that's nothing can be like an in-person connection of like kind of getting a vibe for a place and like making those relationships. And I think like in the Midwest, we don't do that quite enough. And it's a little bit like, what? Like, why aren't people like getting to know like Chicago and in like Grand Rapids and Detroit and Cleveland and like, all over the place. Like it's a little bit, from the research that we do, it's just like a lot of these ecosystems have a lot of this, are at the same stage and have had, a few big successes, have a few good investors, have a few good universities. And so there's like so much overlap and sharing that I think could happen that's like a really good point. So
yeah, any types of connections, it's hard. We have to work to overcome it. But I think when we have a lot of different connections and reasons to connect and talk, could be really helpful. It's like there's a group, Nextgen Mentoring, that was started out of Rev 1 in Columbus. And I was asked to be a mentor to somebody else in venture. And I got teamed up with Stephen Cook, who's at Chicago Ventures. So it's great. So every few weeks, he and I connect, and that's, again, another very good, it's a personal connection. It's only been virtual, but it works because we kind of have we're a disciplined process to get together and talk and share concepts. And I think that's how those learning loops get overcome, but it does take some effort. It doesn't happen as easy as when you're half hour down the road from each other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining. Sorry I took up like literally your whole morning on the day of your annual meeting.
No problem. It's a breeze.
Yeah, super excited. And then I will hopefully talk to you more soon.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks for asking me to join. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I was going to tell the rest of you to join. Next week, we have Brett from Ludlow Ventures discussing building an authentic investment relationship. And it's going to be super exciting. So I will hopefully see you all next Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. on Facebook. And we're streaming live on Twitter now, too. Yay! Okay, see you all soon.